Yep, it says it's streaming live now.
Great. Great. Okay, so we're going to start off showing you a little bit about eco-patination. So the word eco, so we'll be using sort of natural ingredients or ingredients that maybe haven't got harmful chemicals in them. Things that you can maybe find in your kitchen cupboard and use as well, and stuff that's maybe easy to do at home or readily available at home. I would still say to use maybe an open window or make sure it's well ventilated, just due to kind of some of the smells that might occur, but hopefully it shouldn't be too bad. And then patination, so just using these ingredients to sort of colour your metal in a certain way, whether it be copper or brass, and it's worth maybe experimenting. I'm only going to be showing you with maybe one piece per patination. And sometimes these things take a few days as well to kind of occur, so it won't be an instant, you know, putting the piece of copper into a solution. It won't be an instant thing. You might have to wait and keep checking it after a couple of days, or again in your technical notes, maybe look at it and sort of write down, take a photo of it. This is what it looks like after 6 hours. This is what it looks like after 24 hours. This is what it looks like after 48 hours. And if you're quite happy with that, you can kind of stop the patination by taking it out. Okay, so I'm going to start again just by preparing the metal. So first of all, I'll start with a little copper sample here, just a flat sample. And I've started to emery it, but you can just emery with some quite fine emery paper, maybe about 600, to get the surface really nice and clean. Right, there we go. And you're trying to kind of, again, keep it free of grease from your hands, so I wouldn't really touch it after that. Now there's two different types of patinating the metal. One is by fuming, so allowing the fumes kind of to surround the metal and to transport the kind of patina on that way. And another way is by burying the metal into something and letting the patination happen that way. So for the type that I'm going to start off with doing by using sort of the fumes, I've just filled this jar here with vinegar. So I filled it about a third of the way up with just distilled malt vinegar, which is here, probably upside down. Oops. There we go. Okay. So I've put that into the jar. I've drilled a hole in my piece of copper and I'm going to thread that through a bit of wire. Show you here. So I'm threading it through, and this is going to allow me to sit it inside the jar and still close the jar, but for it not to touch the vinegar. It's not going to go right in, it's not going to go right inside the vinegar, because I don't want that. I want it to just sort of dangle above and let the fumes go into it. For the next piece, I'm going to put in another piece as well of copper, but this time with this piece, I'm going to actually put a drop of vinegar on top of it. I'm just going to dab it on with a little brush. So I've just got my brush. Be careful not to reuse, obviously, the vinegar for any kind of cooking or anything now that you've used it. But I'm just going to put some vinegar on top of the surface, just dab it on to the surface of the copper. Then I'm going to take some salt. So in this little tub, I've got a little bit of rock salt. I'm going to sprinkle that on top. Okay. I'm going to add a little bit more just of the vinegar, just so it soaks in. And hopefully this will give us a bit of a pattern on the patination once it comes out. Okay. And then again, I'm going to thread. Oops. You might find some of the salt sort of falls off if it's not sort of sticking on. What I'm actually going to do as well, sprinkle in a little bit more to allow for anything that's going to drop off. But I'm just going to string this on as well to the piece of copper wire. Okay, and then I'm going to open the jar. Just going to pop these two into the jar, sort of hanging off like that. And then squash the ends over the side of the jar and then replace the lid. Okay, so I don't want to, I'll aim the camera at the end to show you what that looks like, but really it's just the two bits of copper hanging down into the jar, so they're not really touching the vinegar inside. Okay, so that's the first method. And I'm just going to leave that for, 24 hours. So tomorrow, what I'll do is I'll take them out and I'll take a photograph and I'll post that as well so you can see sort of the outcome of each kind of sample. So the next method is kind of the burying method. So for this, you need a substrate. So that can be anything that's maybe rice, cotton wool. I'm using shredded paper. And this is so that we can soak whatever it is. So you could be soaking cotton wool or soaking the paper, excuse me, with the vinegar. So I've just poured that in just to cover it. And then I've pre-cleaned this piece of copper. And what I'm going to do is now bury it right inside of the solution. I'm just going to get my paintbrush back and really cover it up. So it's really buried deep inside of this little plastic tub. There we go. And then I'm going to close the lid and leave that. So make sure it's really tight as well. So this method here, it's kind of buried, so it's touching the vinegar, whereas in the jar, it's hanging up slightly and it's just allowing the fumes that's coming off from the vinegar to patinate it. And I'll set that to the side. Okay, then we're going to move on to using a different material or ingredient. We're going to use some soy sauce. Make sure it's the right way around. So there's some soy sauce, just dark soy. You could try it with light soy, depending on what you've got in your cupboard. I've also got a bag, a little zippy bag of rice. And I'm going to just soak the rice, open it up. You don't need much, as long as there's enough rice that if you put a small bit of copper or brass in there, it would cover it. So again, we're using the burying method. I'm just going to open the soy sauce, pour it in, and really soak the rice. Now, if for any of these patterns you want a sort of speckled effect, then you could, before you put in the piece of copper, so I've got my piece of copper here, if I wanted maybe a little pattern or to experiment with another piece of copper, I could do what I did for one of the circular piece where I sprinkled some vinegar on it and then sprinkled some salt. So you could put in a couple of pieces into this bag. You could experiment with having just vinegar splattered on, or vinegar and then some rock salt. For this example, I'm just going to keep it plain copper. You can see I've sort of soaked in the soy sauce. Really sort of make sure, if there's any areas of the rice that's not coated, I'm just going to make sure that it's all mixed in. Then I'm going to pop my piece in. And again, I'll poke that with my paintbrush right inside. I'm going to push it to one side because I want to put in a piece of brass. So I'm going to try the brass with it as well to see if it gets if it's going to give me a different effect. And on this piece of brass is kind of like a little roll printed texture. So I'll pop that into the other side. Push it down in with my paintbrush and just make sure it's well buried. Then I'm going to lock the bag and seal it. I'm going to put that to the side, just with my other patinas. Then I've got a little tub of salt. So you can see there, it's kind of the rock salt. I'll maybe add a little bit more because I want to experiment. I'm going to add a little bit more of the rock salt into the tub. Now this time I've got some, it's kind of like a fake Tabasco sauce. So if you've got Tabasco sauce, or if you like red hot sauce on your food, I'm going to try this. And I'm going to open it up and sprinkle that into the salt. Actually, I might take the whole, let's see if I can take the whole lid off because it comes out so little. I'm just going to put that in there. And I'm going to just swirl it about my paintbrush. And then this time I've got a bit of copper. It's got a slight pattern on it already, just from roll printing. So I want to see if it is a textured piece of metal, what effect will that give me? I'm going to push it right inside, so make sure it's really covered. And I'm actually going to just experiment by taking a little bit of salt. I'm going to leave that area. There's a wee tiny hole there that's exposing a bit of the copper. I'm just going to sprinkle on some salt, really concentrated on that area. And then I'll be really careful when I move the tub. So I've sprinkled that on. I'm going to cover that up. And I'm going to put that over to the side as well. Okay. And then for the final one, I'm going to go back to Ziploc bag of rice. I mean, these are quite big bags. You can also use, like, you could pour that, actually, that's maybe too big a bag. Let's decant that so that I'm not wasting much. It's just a small sample. So I'm going to decant that into a smaller bag, the rice. Okay. Use a Tupperware dish underneath just to catch any grains of rice that escaped there. So I've got the Tupperware bag with some rice in it again. This time I'm going back to my vinegar. I'm going to pour in vinegar this time. And this time I've got a curved surface. So I've got a curved surface, a dome. And I quite fancy now, again, just putting some vinegar onto the copper and putting a wee little bit of salt on it just to see if I can create a kind of pattern. This time I've got some salt, but it's finer salt. It's not the rock salt. So I'm going to sprinkle that on. And where I've put the vinegar, it's sort of almost sticking to it. It's like it's snowing. So just dabbing that on. So you can see there, it sort of sticks to where there was vinegar. So it's not all over the surface. And then I'm going to just put that inside the bag. Make sure it's really deeply buried. I'm going to close that over. And then actually I'm going to leave it in the Tupperware dish because I noticed there's a slight hole in the bag. So for me, I'm just going to close over there. And then it's good, you can reuse the tubs, or you could maybe put a wee sticker, masking tape or something on top saying what's inside and the date and time that you put them inside. And don't be tempted just to look at them after an hour. You really want to give them time for the patinas to develop. So maybe give it a good kind of at least 6 hours or something, 6 to 12 hours, and then check, because you don't want to look at it too soon and then the air's getting in. What happens is these are airtight, but as soon as you let air in, it changes the whole dynamics of things, and can alter your patina. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few examples now of ones that I've done before. This one here, just don't know how much this focuses, but this is kind of using the rice, and it was buried in rice. You can sort of almost see the grains of the rice on top. Okay, put that down. We've got one where there was netting from a bag that was sort of soaked onto the vinegar. So you can kind of see, almost if I tilt it to the light, you can see the sort of where it's almost imprinted bits of the thread, or it's left that mark, the markings from it when you took the string off, the stringing off afterwards. It's kind of left a kind of patched effect. This one here is quite interesting. This was, I didn't have any lemons in the house, but this was by just leaving it, putting the brass onto a lid, a Tupperware dish lid. Then I got a lemon, a slice of lemon, and I just put it on top of the brass, and I left it for about a day, and it sort of almost picks up the markings of the lemon. It almost actually looks etched. It's very difficult, obviously, to show you here, but it almost picked up the markings of the lemon. It looks as if it's etched right in. Here's a piece of metal that was sort of etched beforehand. It's picked up a little bit of the blue inside where the etching is. That was using salt and vinegar. So these are all just using natural materials. Again, this is another one with the rice. It's quite nice, the ones with the rice, because it leaves that sort of texture. So we got, there's this one here. It's kind of, it's got a sort of slight brown colour. This was using salt and vinegar, and it was using the fume method in the jar, and it's actually on a piece of steel. So again, you could try different materials, different metals, and see if you get a different kind of effect from them. So we got. Again, you know, every time you do it, it looks slightly different. Nothing really ever comes out the same way twice. Here's a piece here, it's like a lighter blue. So you might find, you know, these two here, so that one and that one, they're kind of lighter blues. Whereas, you know, this one here is actually a very, very deep dark blue. Okay. And then this one here was with the rice, but it's on brass. And the longer you leave it in, you know, almost, the vinegar almost acts like a pickle. It does start to kind of etch. The longer you leave it in, it can etch it away. And you can get quite interesting surface textures and colours on the metals. And then here's a couple of almost made up pieces that are almost made. This was a box ring. So you'll be learning, you know, how to make one of them, covered in patina. Here's a dome. Patina has been sort of fixed on with a spray. Try and put that in the shot. And then here's a couple of nice press forms to show you. There we go. You know, it's quite interesting, a combination. This one's got sort of punched, sort of drilled from the back. You can see it's taking the patina halfway. It's quite nice, interesting texture. It goes with the sort of markings. And this one here, again, it's just in splodges. So although these are both the same press form shape, what you do with the patina can alter the look of them dramatically. I think that's all. I think the other ones are kind of not as interesting, I'm afraid. There's this one that's quite nice. It's this was done with heat. So it was heated up to the copper was, you know, it goes that pinky red when you heat it. And then it was put into the solution. Okay. And then to seal it afterwards, because it's just a surface, you know, it's not actually integrating into the metal, it's just sitting on top of the surface, the patina. So, for example, with this one here, it could just rub off. Sometimes be careful if you take it out of the solution or you take it out of the rice, whatever it is it's in, and then you maybe go to brush it or something, it'll just come off. So you have to be very careful. These are good as their samples, but if you're working with a finished piece, you have to think of the manufacturing steps and the finishing steps, so that you're not putting a patina on and then you think, oh no, I've got to solder it afterwards. So think about when you're going to apply it. But for samples, you can do it, you know, at any stage if it's just a sample. So if it's going to rub off afterwards, you know, bits are flaking off already, it can be quite matte. So what I would do is I've got this clear sealer here, and I just apply that on to the surface. And you can get clear sealers that are glossy. This one here is satin. So afterwards, you know, you would just put your sample down in a well ventilated area again and give it a quick spray just to seal it. Okay, so hopefully that gives you kind of just a really basic introduction to using maybe safer solutions and ingredients, and it gives you, you know, really nice and interesting colours and textures onto the metal without maybe using such harmful